So give yourself a moment to settle into your stance, moving gently. Just see how this feels as you start to move, and looking for that just slightly more spacious feeling in your movements, so that you're not going beyond that space. And so this is a very free feeling movement, no sort of restriction. You want to feel almost as though there's a kind of breeze on your shoulder that pushes you around. One of the part work exercises that we do sometimes is usually standing in this stance, and somebody will just push you, and you just let them push you, and then they push you somewhere else, and you let them move you, and they're not trying to push you over and like that. They're just giving you the lightest of touch, and you're seeing if you can respond to that. And that's a mixture of it's tricky, being aware of the movement, being aware of the touch, or wherever the impetus for the movement is coming from, but not letting that awareness delve into, oh, somebody's pushed me on my shoulder, I now have to move. You're looking for a very spontaneous response to that movement. And it's the same here. You're moving, you become aware of a sort of tightening up, a restriction to the movement, but before it actually gets to that bit where there's a kind of gripping feeling, you're just coming back. And you won't get it every time. Sometimes you'll find that you go too far, sometimes you think you could have gone further. Giving you this, I suppose, first stage of the process of changing how you're actually moving. And the first stage has to be, as much as possible, a letting go, a releasing of previous ways of moving. And it's always interesting teaching this to beginners and even more experienced people, because it's very easy to do this and not actually get that feeling of movement in the center of your body. To begin with, we exaggerate this movement. In truth, it's a very small movement so that you can hardly see it, but you can still pick it up when it's happening. So this is very obviously wrong. Another thing you want to avoid is twisting in the middle of the body. Now, some of this is down to the focus of our attention. And so this is why I've been getting people to do something like that. You put one hand maybe on your belly, and you just get a sense for the movement there. And almost inevitably you move too far, I think, which is why your knees, you can see my knees going slightly out of line. I'm not bothered about that at the moment. I just want to feel what's happening there. You may want to put both hands there, because you'll also become aware of muscular contraction and expansion and just other forms of movement. Likewise on your back, just slightly below the small of your back. There tends to be more happening there, and that can be quite interesting to feel that movement. But in fact, the main purpose of this exercise is that through that medium of touch, we're actually very much bringing our attention to this part of the body. It is still the case that arms can dominate the movement. You know, sometimes we do this, and as soon as we've got our hands, we kind of go back to this, because it is a very subtle feeling that you get, and until you've got a sense of that, it's very easy just to go back to almost a kind of top-heavy movement. But there's certain characteristics that we notice. One is how heavy the arms are, because as soon as we start moving from the center, and we get an automatic release in our shoulders, we're no longer kind of holding our arms like this and straining. So the full weight of the arm is actually felt from your shoulder. Another is that a sense of rhythm builds through the whole of your body, certainly the whole of your upper body. But what you may notice is, if you look at my knees, this happening still. Now, ideally, we don't really want that to happen. We want to keep the knees still. But even when we keep them still, they will feel some movement. So the method that we use to keep, actually keeping them still is the wrong way of describing it. We want to keep the knees in line, hips, toes, knees pointing in the same direction. So this is not something that we want to encourage. In the long term, it will put a strain on the tendons of your knees. The knee is a funny joint. It's not a proper hinge joint because it also has sideways movement, unlike your elbow, for instance. So the correction, and this is something that takes a while to build, is that when I turn, it tends, I've turned to my left, it's my right knee that's come in, and what I do is I rotate it out. And then I turn the other way. Now the left knee's come in and I rotate it out. Or if you prefer, as some people think, when your knee gets pulled across, what you do is you push it forwards. Either way, what it does is it maintains the position of your knees. If you can do that with either one or both legs, then using your hands again, just place your hands on your thighs, and in particular the quadricep muscles, but also the muscles on the outside, what they call the abductor muscles, going down the outside of the leg. And so when you can get this adjustment, and again it's quite difficult because inevitably you move too far, but when you can get this adjustment, you'll feel what the muscles are doing to make the adjustment. It's all sort of like pieces of a jigsaw, and it's all part and parcel of building up this inner picture of what is happening within the body's landscape. So that, I mean, this thing about adjusting the knees, it took me a long time, several years really, of coming back to it and trying it before it was beginning to happen much more naturally. And even now, I don't get it right all the time. And just try and approach this with a light touch. And when I started looking at this, and I was thinking about this movement and that, I found that for several days, I would go outside and start practicing, and I would do this, and yeah, okay, that's okay. And then I'll start trying to do some movement, and I couldn't remember anything else. I was so taken up with the knee that I simply couldn't do any other movements. But over a period of time, I just kept sort of coming back to it every now and then, trying it out, and gradually it improved. There's what we call the muscle memory as much as anything else. It carries a great deal of significance to it. One of my sort of favorite things to demonstrate in a class when there's other people there is the difference between this and this. So from the front it would be this, and then the back knee collapses inwards. I get somebody to push on my arm. I can stand there and they'll push in, and this feels quite solid. But as soon as my knee drops in even a little bit, then actually, that's interesting. If you look closely there, as I do this, can you see my whole body changes when my knee turns in? If somebody were pushing me, as soon as that happened, I'd get pushed over. So it's not a big movement, but it is one that has a significant effect on the body's overall structure. But what it does mean also is that we're now becoming aware of the connection, not just upwards from the center of the body to our arms, but also downwards to the feet. We realize that this central part of the body really is at the hub of the body. That any movement that takes place there is going to affect and radiate out to the rest of the body. And just raising your arms a little. Give your legs a shake. So in this position, just begin to sink down and push up. Now, once again, just start off maybe just placing one hand on your belly. Movements there are very subtle, but again, this is bringing your attention. Remember, touch has such a primal quality about it. Babies will reach out, won't they, instantly. So we can just become aware. This isn't just the hips dropping and the knees bending. There's a great deal of change going on in the body as we do this. Place one hand in your back. There is you'll notice it much more strongly in your back, I imagine. Hips are another one, of course. Thighs, muscles of the legs. So if you think about it, this simple act of sinking your hips down, actually there's a great deal going on in that whole area. I suppose really between your waist and your knees. And it's important that we allow space for that to happen. So once again, we're back to this idea of letting go. We know, for instance, and you'll feel it there, as you sink down, the pelvis will tuck under. Now, again, it's quite tricky. We want to be careful that we don't start thinking, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to make this happen. What we're doing is observing what is already happening within the body, and possibly noting something. It might be, for instance, something that can happen very easily is you sink down and you notice, oh, your knees push together, or maybe they turn out. There's all sorts of reasons why that might happen. And when you notice things like that, then you can start to very gently bring about corrections. You might notice that as you sink down, it's, you're favoring one leg slightly, and so on and so forth. And so we begin to make quite small adjustments, very carefully and very gently, giving them time to take effect. So don't just think, I've got to do this, and this, because it'll be too much. Bring your hands around as though you're cradling a ball, pushing up and sinking down. Once you've noticed these movements somewhere, you're more likely to notice them elsewhere. I mean, I've been talking about the central part of our bodies, but the movements move up our back, they go into our shoulders, we feel them in the front of our body. and then change into the wild goose. And then part in the clouds. As you do this, you can also think about the hand itself. So, but this is the basic, what we would call hand form. So your hand is slightly cupped, and it can very easily happen that can happen. Your thumb can stick out. Sometimes the little finger, and so you just gently roll them in. Not too much. You keep it's basically straight, but curved. And one way in which we can identify that is quite useful. Is just to place the center of the palm of your hand over your kneecap and let your fingers wrap around the knee as much as possible. Then when you take your hand away, you've got that position. Some people prefer to do it on their forehead. It doesn't really matter. So we get away from this kind of stiffness in the fingers. And I sometimes think that that kind of thought, that kind of approach actually softens the movements of the arms, and perhaps is more likely to actually encourage the rest of the body to sort of get behind the movement that we want to feel in the arms and the hands. Good. Now change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. One more time after this. And then pushing in 4 directions. It's those very subtle, small changes that begin to overlap with what we might call the energy of the movement. It's not a hard boundary. There's not sort of physical movement and then there's the energy any more than there's a hard boundary between what we think of as mind, what we think of as body. They blend into each other, these three elements, and overlap. Hips hanging back, soften your knees. One more round. And then pushing the arm away. And if it's comfortable, next time you can add the turn. Now, changing sides. And again, if it's comfortable, you can add the turn. and then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. And polishing the table. One more time. And stand. Give us a shake. And a slightly wider stance. Now here too, we've got to think about the knees not collapsing inwards. But remember, we're only going to about 60% of the weight in each foot. So with the sideways movements, I think it's better to do them in a slightly wider stance. You can do them in a narrow stance. Those of you familiar with Tai Chi form will know that when we do wave hands like clouds, we drop the weight straight down. So it can be done. But generally speaking, I think the sideways movements are particularly in these exercises, are quite subtle and they're quite small. 60% is not a big movement. So the wider stance gives you more time to appreciate that. When you're in the normal stance, it's like the movement is over almost before it's begun. When we turn a little bit in the center of the body, moving across, just feel the center of your body drifting across. These movements again, nice and smooth, hands in front of you. We're going to go into, first of all, parting the wild horse's mane. So turn your right hand palm down, start in your right leg and push into the left. The arm that's extending outwards, actually, most of the movement still in your weight. And really the arm, the main movement is your arm rising up. A little bit of placement stimulated by the turn in the center, so that the main sensation associated with this raising of the arm is going to be very similar to the one that we get in Dragon Plucks the Stars from the Sky. As you move across, so here you start on your left, as you move across to your right, here in the quad, in the front of the hip, there's an opening, and here in front of the right shoulder, there's an opening, and then they both close. So it's almost, if you can imagine, you've got an elastic band from diagonally across your body. As you do this, that elastic band extends out and then contracts. These movements are happening all through our body, both in terms of sort of, as we've noted, muscular movement, but in that sort of energetic sense as well. Feeling of opening along that diagonal line. But there's various ways that we can respond to that. If you go out now, we're going to go into the movement Y tape up as fruit. Instead of using that contraction to bring your left arm back, use it to bring your right arm forwards and just drop your left elbow down. You turn the body slightly. You pull back for once, you come up, pulling the hand up as though you're pulling your fingers out of mud and drop down. Turn your hand in as though you're holding a ball between your hands and push forwards. Then you come back, both hands coming across, but your right hand sweeps down to hold the bottom of the ball. And you move into your left leg. And we start the same way. We open and we close as though your left arm is trying to touch your right elbow. And then you pull back over and down, turn the hand in and push forwards. Coming back. When we come up in that way, don't lock the knees, you don't come up that far. So a little bit more complex, a little bit more opportunity just to feel those dynamic changes within your body. Once you get used to the pattern, it repeats over and over again, and we can start to just let our sense of awareness drop below the surface of the pattern. So there's more going on than, say, some of the earlier exercises that we do, but hopefully not so much that it takes forever to actually become familiar with the movements. One more. Check out. So I like Y tape as a sort of mini form. One of the lovely things about the Tai Chi forms, of course, is that the complexity there's a huge variety of these changes within the body. That can be a disadvantage because there are so many that you can get lost in them. And another disadvantage is just the difficulty of learning them. It takes time to learn a Tai Chi form, and that difficulty will often defeat us. So it takes longer before you can get beneath the surface. White taper is a nice little movement because it's kind of halfway between those two extremes. Now, 1 foot forwards. Again, you're just placing your hands on various parts around your thighs, maybe your lower back and hips, so on and so forth. Can give you a sense for the subtlety of the movement there. You're trying to maintain your pelvis as being level. So, you may even notice changes there. If you were doing this on a rough piece of ground, if you're doing it outside, for instance, say on a lawn that wasn't even, the feet would be at a slightly different height. And that's also quite interesting to feel, because obviously there's going to be more adjustment needed. And we begin to realize that when it's allowed to, this central part of the body functions in part in the same way that the suspension on a car functions. If you've ever been in a car with the suspension broken, every bump is massive. It's a complete jar. It's also quite hard to steer because a little bump will have you veering all over the place. But the springs of the suspension absorb those irregularities in the road, which means the car carries on in a straight line and is reasonably comfortable. And this central part of our body functions in the same way. When we walk along and the pavement dips, or going across the fields, a little rise, we barely notice it because the pelvis is working, hopefully. But if we're holding ourselves stiff and tight, that's going to be a lot more difficult. And also perhaps here, when we raise our toes, we raise our heel, that's sinking down, little adjustments there. The area of the pelvic floor is one much focused on in falls rehabilitation therapy. So when people have problems with falling, and they do, I think it's an 8-week course these days, then a lot of emphasis is placed on what they call strengthening the pelvic floor, because we can begin to see how vital that area is. It's not just a matter of strengthening, though. Can the adjustments be made? The nervous system is going to be involved in that. Stepping in. And on the other side. And then raising your toes and your heel. Stepping in. Stepping through. And then going back. And shake out. Interestingly, one of the things I've seen used for helping in falls rehabilitation, sometimes used in exercise classes, particularly aimed at older people, is an uneven surface, and they're accompanied, but they're asked to walk over these uneven surfaces. And the point's been made that actually we don't do that anything like as often as we used to. You know, we're practicing on a flat floor, I presume. I know I am. You know, even allowing for poor quality pavements, they tend to be fairly flat. We go down to shopping centres and they're fairly flat. We don't get the same kind of practice of walking across rough ground, for instance, that we might have done maybe 100 years ago or something like that. And there's always the thing about use it or lose it, of course. And these small subtle changes, adjustments in the pelvis are so crucial for mobility, for stability, are actually things that are easily lost as we grow older. So exercises like this, and I say, you know, try it on a kind of uneven piece of lawn as well, are actually very useful. It's very simple. It's just use it or lose it. So the reason, for the most part, that they would decline is because they're not being used, and as the body grows older, it tends to sort of like push out the things that are not being used. So if you keep on using it, then the body will keep supporting those actions. Go your right foot forwards. Let's start with fisherman castanet. Now, when you arrive in the front foot, focus on letting your hips drop, letting your shoulders drop, and just seeing how far your arms get. You'll notice that you're probably starting to move back before your hands have finished the forward swing. That's fine. That's more obvious, I think, moving from the back, because the arms don't actually swing out as much. So when I'm here, I'm not moving my arms up there. My hips are moving forwards here already. But the main thing I want you to focus on is actually dropping the hips, and perhaps seeing what effect that has on how our arms are moving. and then changing. The same with pushing a wave. There's an idea called promoted by a guy called Patrick Kelly. He talked about the Tai Chi circle. It's quite interesting to think of this, that when you start on your back foot, there's a downward movement. Now he talks about it curving up. But whether you think of that or not doesn't really matter. But what it means is, because it's curving forwards and down, the deepest part of the root, shall we call it, actually isn't here or in the front leg, but it's halfway in between the two. So it's almost like you're going here and you're going like that. And that's similar to how he would do it. It's not actually how I would do it. My own feeling about that is it's almost like if you think being at the top of a slide, actually when we go down a slide in a playground or something like that, there's two directions of movement. There's a downward movement, but there's a forwards movement. But we don't think about it. We don't say, I'm going to go forward on the slide. We say we're going to go down the slide. And the shape of the slide takes us forwards. And you can think of this like this. It actually really helps to deepen that sense of the root. And this all important sense of your hips sinking downwards. Do one more of these, and if the idea works for you, try and keep that in mind. And here, bring your hands down. As your hands rise, let your hips sink, and then go forwards through here, turning slightly. And you're not doing this, you're not coming up with this, you want your hips to continue sinking down, which again means, as with, I think I said it with Heart in the Wild Horse's Mane, that expansion up through one side of your body. Not dissimilar to the feeling we get with Dragon Plucks the Stars from the Sky again. And then this time, as your hands come up, bring the front foot in. Step, push down, you go across the hips, so your hands expand upwards and outwards. Bring the back foot in, step back as the hands start to come down. They come into your hip, upwards and outwards. So like a sideways figure of 8, or you would think of it as an infinity sign. The important thing is really here, keep your hips hanging back and down. Very easy with this one to get drawn out of your root and come up like that. Like that. Good. And shake out. Left foot forwards. So starting the game with Fisherman Caster down. and then change into pushing away. And then turn in as you go back. Into step. So you can begin to get a sense there. The foot comes in as your hands rise. It goes down as your hands go down. And you can take that into just a simple stepping pattern. I generally show this forwards and backwards. And of course, from this position, you have a certain amount of choice. You could, for instance, turn your body slightly, step a little bit to the side. You could turn that again. So it's quite an adaptable exercise. In fact, it's based on the internal art of Bhagwa, which is generally, the forms generally go around in a circle in Bhagwa. So the key position is here. Then we can choose, now I could do this, for instance. So mostly quite an interesting exercise to practice. Also a very useful one, because you're not so dependent on a particular space. And then just bring your feet parallel. So you could, if you've got sort of like garden with there's something going on the lawn, or somebody's left a lawnmower there. They do sometimes around where I live. Think, oh, I'll just go around the lawnmower. I don't have to go in a straight line. So it's quite a nice way to do that. And it comes from this position here. This is where we can make the choice. I'm on one leg. I can put my foot down there, there, there. I could even do that. I probably wouldn't want to do that, but anywhere in this sort of half circle is fine to place the foot down. As long as you've got this position, then you have the choice. So it's quite a nice little exercise to practice. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over the face. Over your head and neck. Down the shoulder. Side. Your back. Right on your belly. Yep. Just a reminder that on the 25th of June, I'm doing a day retreat out in Reach Village Hall. And if you're interested in, you know, a more extended period of Tai Chi, runs from 10 till 4. Email me if you want details of that, or they're on the monthly newsletter. Now back to the hip width starts, the parallel starts, and embrace tiger, return to mountain. And stand. Lovely. Thank you very much, both of you. So that